Hey everybody, welcome back to the Latin Women in Action podcast. We're back here at it again with,
Sam.
and I'm Haydee, and we are your hosts today. Sam, would you like to uh introduce what the topic is going to be today?
Of course, today is episode 5, and we're going to be discussing being from immigrant families and their effects on mental health and how we live life. Since both of us we both have immigrant parents,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so many similarities, even like between different cultures, just of the experience of being raised by people who are immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. And we've spoken about this before. We were just like, we really need to make an episode about, our backgrounds, even though we come from two different cultures, we come from immigrant parents that probably they've had a certain way of parenting, um and in some similarities, like this kind of masculinity or this kind of overshadowing or setting aside emotions. So we
Yeah.
want to talk about how important it is, and be aware and bring awareness to mental health, especially in these communities that don't really pay much attention to, especially years ago. I feel like now our generation and our generations that are becoming parents, they're a lot more aware, especially them being or coming from different countries. I feel like now it's a lot more open. Now it's
Oh,
a
definitely.
lot more awareness towards it, and which is amazing and great, especially within men's mental health.
Mhm.
um so let's get started on that.
I
All
feel
right.
like just to build off of that point, I feel like it's also because there's so many more resources now that are in different languages, and which is so important because like my immigrant parents, like they didn't really know English that well when they came in. Like it's hard to get resources, especially in like my parents spoke Tibetan, which is
Mhm.
like kind of like an obscure language. So obviously there was nothing there for them. But now there's so many Tibetan groups that are like here to help like new parents and like also like helping raise parents, but they're all doing it in like Tibetan. So
Yeah.
there's instead of doing it in like English with like where there's obviously such a like a language barrier.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
No, but that's even great too, because even you mentioning, I know we've spoken about how your culture within the Tibetan community is kind of like fading out, it's
Yeah.
kind of like, there's no like strictness of like, we need to, well, there is, but it's not, constantly on the move or on the go.
Yeah,
Whereas
definitely.
like, being Latino or Hispanic, some of the cultures or like some of the things that we do are, being repeated through the next generation. Now it's up for you guys, the Tibetan community, to keep that culture living, not letting it die out, especially the with the issues that you've mentioned to me about Tibet and China, that whole situation. But would you say that your parents coming from Tibet, were they affection like not a I guess affectionate, or were they very open of asking you, how do you feel today? um what is it that you need? Is everything okay? How's school? How's your mental health? Were they pretty much, you know, like that when you were growing up?
Like there's that Asian stereotype where like the tiger mom and like very like distant parent. But there is some truth to that, I feel like, especially with like in Asian cultures, there's such a I don't want to say like a focus on kind of like there's almost like a distance
Hmm.
between, at least traditionally, like I feel like I see it in my own parents when they interact with their parents. It's hard because I don't really know. I feel like I don't know a lot about like Tibetan parenting because it's not, or like I guess the traditions that are like in it, because it's a lot of religious based. And in Buddhism, there's such a strong hold for like compassion, and I definitely see that. Like my parents trying to live up to that, but it's also kind of but it's also like hard because they grew up so differently
Hmm.
than how I did. And like my mom went to boarding school, right? When she was from kindergarten to 12th grade in a different country than where her parents were.
Oh.
So there's definitely like there's that part. And then like my dad, like they all grew it up in Nepal. Um
And there's definitely
Meanwhile,
like, I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's so interesting because like, having your mom going to boarding school, it's not like you really have your parents. So it's just kind of like
yeah,
this dependent, and I wonder, if so, if there was like some sort of guidance counselor, even like, in that boarding school. Because like, when you're growing up, especially your teenage years can be crucial because you're going through so much. And I'm sure, you yourself see it because, you're a teenager and
mhm.
I can experience like I'm a young adult now. I'm 23 years old, and not too long ago I was a teenager and my head was just everywhere, especially about like uh wanting a relationship or like anything to do with like household things or school. Like it's just a lot, and you can only imagine how you can like cope with these feelings that you just like, it's crazy. um and in that case, it's it's sometimes hard, especially when you don't have parents that are not really aware or just make sure like that giving you that reassurance like, hey, I'm here for you, like, hey, I'm here for you. Is there anything that you want to talk about, or like just that initiation? Because sometimes like even as a teenager you're just kind of like, get out, like stop,
Yeah,
like this is
definitely
just
the moody
no.
teenager phase.
Exactly. But it's just like as a parent, you still need to do that. Even if your kid is not really like interactive in that way, it's just kind of like building that reassurance for them of just like, okay, I know my parents are here. At least I can talk to them. Or even building like little by little, because maybe sometimes teenagers are like preteens or kids, they don't really know how to express themselves. So it's just like kind of also giving them that space of like, what made you feel that way, or give them examples of your own like experiences. um and then maybe that can help, and building that like the building step towards them being a lot more open to you. And that's the important part. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist or a therapist or licensed to say that, but I feel like me as an individual, as a human being who has experienced many emotions, I feel like that's just, how it would be. And it would be great to, eventually speak to someone in this podcast about that.
Yeah,
Um,
that definitely. I think it's so unique that your outlook of like having immigrant parents being raised by them, but also like now having your own kid and now it's like breaking
yeah,
generational
yeah,
curses.
generation for sure. Because it's like, I've mentioned this to you, even though my mom was amazing. Of course, there's certain things that she could have done better. And I'm not justifying, her being a single parent where like, she like, it's so much. And I'm grateful and I'm very appreciative and I love my mom to death and she's done so much. And obviously there's certain things that she could have done better. And sometimes hard for me to kind of, being from a Latina background and seeing her struggle at times was hard for me to think of like, why do I need to be emotional? Why should I like add more stress to her? I didn't know how to be emotional or affectionate. I just didn't
Yeah.
know how to express myself. And also like, my grandparents helped to raise me because my mom was always working her butt off. So my grandpa would take care of me, from like, well, by the time I was in school, he would pick me up from, the time I'd get out of school until like 6, 7 p.m. until my mom would get back home. So it was just kind of like my grandpa was such the sweetest. Like he is my sweet, like that's my everything. And I would be able to talk to him about anything. Well, obviously not everything, but you know,
I get what you mean.
yeah, he was my sweetheart. So it's just like he's my everything, he's my comfort. My grandma, on the other hand, she's a lot more tough skinned. She is that definition of like kind of implementing a little bit of machismo, but not really. But it's just like, sometimes it's just like I've heard her either say, no, like it's you're just being a little bit dramatic, or it's just like a little, you're
Mhm.
just, and sometimes like you just don't need that.
Yeah.
um I'm not saying that she's the worst person, or I'm not saying
No,
like,
I get what you
I love,
mean.
yeah, and I love my grandma. It's just sometimes like some of your relatives aren't as understanding, especially when they come from like, they were born years ago and they were
I'm
raised
just,
a certain way,
I just want to ask, like, do you speak to your grandparents in English or do you speak to them in Spanish?
in Spanish.
See, I think it's so because like I'm not good at Tibetan, right? Like my Tibetan's pretty poor and like
Uh-huh.
conversational level. Like I can understand it. To ask me to speak it back to someone, it's not happening. So there's definitely a
Mhm.
disconnect between like or like even to my grandparents. Like I can't really talk to my grandparents because they're all like completely fluent in
Feel
Tibetan,
like
but they
this
don't. Yeah,
separation or like very not very, but I know
it
what
kind
you're
of is
trying.
a barrier. Like I remember when I went to Nepal to visit my like late grandmother, like to my grandmother on my dad's side, and I couldn't talk to her because I was like a first grader who didn't really know any Tibetan, especially because that was when like because I used to know Tibetan when I was younger, but then when I went to like school
Cool.
and there were
English.
no other Tibetan, yeah, so like all like and I like my parents like they pushed me to know like I know they pushed me to know English more
Hmm.
because I like I can't really use Tibetan. And I went to like a predominantly like white I think it was predominantly white and then like the second most was like Hispanic. So like nobody spoke. Like there weren't really any Asian kids.
I
Like, I
felt
remember there
that.
was this one other Asian girl and we would be like besties because we were both like, you're Asian, I'm Asian. Yeah.
No, and it's so true. And that like that's the sad truth too. At times, like I get it, being in this country, there's like it's so easy to just, learn English. And even as a parent myself, like I try to speak as much Spanish to my daughter so that she knows and she doesn't become a no sabo kid. Like, come on now.
I
But
wonder
no,
how
there's
it's
nothing
like.
wrong with the no sabo kid. There's nothing wrong. It's just like, I want her to continue like the culture. I want her to continue with the language. I want her to feel accepted. I want her to, at times it was hard for me because I was in the same shoes that you were in. I mainly spoke Spanish because my grandparents were always like I was always with my grandparents. They were taking care of me while my parents were at work, and my dad was very strict on like Spanish, Spanish, Spanish. My mom, on the
Mhm.
other hand, she was pretty much raised here. She went to school. She came here at the age of 7. So, she knows English, and sometimes I guess out of comfortability, like, we would speak, English too at home, but we would mainly try to speak Spanish. And as I got to school and my mom also got remarried again, and like, it was just I mainly spoke English at home and English at, in school, and my
Did you end up
grandma
taking Spanish like in school, like as
I
a foreign
did in high
language?
school. In high school, I took
Mhm.
Spanish. Going back to it, like having that language barrier is, it can be hard too because my
Mhm.
husband, him being, from Colombia too, and coming here at the age of 9, and, his family speaks predominantly Spanish. So sometimes it's kind of like, for example, when I was talking to him yesterday, um, I love feeling like a sense of like family, and it's great that I have conversations with like my in-laws or like whoever, but it's sometimes so hard for me because I do speak decent or like good Spanish, but it's not there. But when I get shy or nervous, I just tend to shut down, and I'm just like, how do I say
That's
this? I don't
so
want to sound
real.
and I don't how do I say this? I don't want to sound dumb. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to sound like crazy or like say something dumb in Spanish, like, so that's why sometimes it's not that I purposely try to only speak English or like, it's just sometimes it's hard for me. Like I'll say a phrase in Spanish, like a sentence in Spanish, and then I kind of have like this transition of like Spanglish, like,
Hmm.
but I
No,
guess
I
that
feel you.
that happens a lot also here, like, being from here, that Spanglish is a thing. It really is.
Yeah.
And it's funny. Yeah, going back to also, the mental health within our communities. I know you mentioned that, it's mental health isn't as like
Definitely not. I feel
as
like in
good.
a lot of Asian communities, at least like both East Asian and South Asian actually, like a lot of
Yes,
it is
I've
like
heard.
you gotta keep it, like bottle it, because it's kind of like a lot of it is bringing shame on your family. Like if you
Now,
have,
I'm sorry to cut you off. Would you say that that's also for like females, or like, women, little girls. Because I can tell that, seeing it from my culture, it's mainly on men. But when it comes to women, it's like, okay, she's bound to cry because she's very emotional. She's being very
Mm,
overdramatic.
I feel
Is
like
it like that?
it's for both.
Mm,
Like at least even like women and men are both expected to be very like
tough
kind
skin.
of like tough skin. Like I think you can see it a lot when like in Asian culture, a lot of it is I don't even know how to say it correctly. Everyone is expected to have like a tough skin and like I don't know, there's a huge stigma around mental illness. Actually, you can see it a lot if you look at like this great like suicide rates in Japan and Korea,
Mm-hmm.
especially all in those cultures, Tibetan culture, Chinese culture, like a lot of it's like you have to keep everything bottled in and you
Uh-huh.
can't talk about it. So that's why there's such high like depression rates and suicide rates. And like when I
Yeah.
talk to my own friends, we talk about how like it's hard to talk to your parents because it's like bringing shame on your family. You know when you watch Avatar and Zuko's talk about his honor and like bringing shame on his family. That's what I kind of mean with like my parents. Oh, like don't talk about it because people are gonna think that we're weird. Like it's not just you. It's like the whole. It's like they're gonna think down on
Worried
like
about how
on.
people
Mhm.
preserve you guys, or like, like think
Think
of you.
about you. Yeah,
Yes.
like
And
it's not
that's
like.
also very like in Hispanic culture too. Like Latino culture, it's like my kid is well, in many ways, because whether you do something, whether you post something, whether the way you speak, the way you
Mhm.
dress, the way your presence um is like, it's not about you or it's not about
It's
them.
about
It's about
everyone.
everyone who's looking at you. And that is so sad because it's just like, well, where's my
Yeah, like.
individuality? Where's my, like, where is your care for me as an individual,
I
not
feel like so much
because of
about
what
like
everyone.
let people be individuals and have their own problems. Like when you do well, you do get the tiger mom, right? Like the Asian like stereotype. But it's because like if you do well, it's like, oh, like look, our family is doing great. It's not just you,
Mhm.
our entire family is doing great. We have doctors and Ivy League, like started from
And
the
you
bottom and now
have
we're up in Ivy
Yeah.
League, you know.
hmm And you have to now do the same thing, or just kind of having this expectation for you or for the rest of the family. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, if you don't meet up to those expectations, it's kind of like,
I feel like that's also unique with like being an immigrant. Oh, like my parents did all of this, like they struggled so much. Like if I don't do great, was it for nothing? Like there's that thought process. Like it's really
mm-hmm,
unhealthy. Like obviously,
literally,
like I know reasonably and like logically, like obviously not. I'm free to do like I shouldn't be
as you
held
want.
down. But there's
Yeah,
also the
that
little voice
part.
at the back of your head. Oh, like your parents did all of this. People have struggled so much for you to get here.
Exactly,
So like
exactly.
and I
And
feel
they
like that's
have
the
these
weight.
exactly. And it's like you feel like, excuse me, you have all eyes on you, and everybody's like, my my granddaughter, my daughter's really smart, she's a good student.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, and you know what I can't stand too? I remember at one point, like, I had thought like, oh, what about, going into writing, and like, or what if I, go into like law and like, politics. All of a sudden, my whole family was like, my daughter, my granddaughter, she wants to become a lawyer. She's gonna go here. I'm just like, like, no, you can't say that because that's not like, I don't really know,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just also that kind of reference to let everybody know, well, my kid,
Like
my
my kid
grandkid is,
is applying to Harvard right now.
yeah, or like
Oh,
my kid wants to be a lawyer, and they're gonna, like, you know what I'm saying, or just
it's
kind
like
of set
bragging
big goals.
rights.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, it's cool because, like, as a parent, sometimes, it can be a little bit of a, like, bragging, or like kind of like showing out, like, yeah, my kid does that, but at the same time, it's not good
It's
because you're
that
kind of setting the
expectation.
expectations.
Yeah,
Exactly, and it's not right because,
definitely.
whatever my kid wants to do, I'm going to support it, or I'm going to try to help in whichever way, or try to understand why is it, like, even if it's not the most ideal thing, practical thing, um,
Mm-hmm.
I'll still try to understand and be there for my kid because I love my kid.
Yeah.
Um, obviously if it's something like, actual, like, getting real good money, or just like what would you say? Like not it doesn't have to be a profession, kind of like being a doctor or whatever. Like, it can be
Yeah.
something else. I mean
You
it
want
in that
to
sense.
you want to do something you're passionate in. I feel like in Asian, they're like we're like, oh, you have to be like a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, you have to be an engineer. It's like you got three options, you pick one. And
Mm-hmm.
I know parents like they want the best for their kid, and often those are like good careers to be in that are like like safe. But I feel like there's so much of it like taking out the passion.
Like you really have to
Realistically,
be
if you don't like medicine and you go to med school, that's gonna do you
draining and a
so
waste of
much
time,
bad. It's a waste of time because you're gonna end up being like, I
hating
don't
it.
like this. And then med school is so expensive, and you have to do 4 years of college before you even start.
Exactly. four
I'm like,
years Then eventually you have to go in for your master's, and or no, you go in also for, what do you call that? Like a residency, and
yeah, it's
you get
so
your
many years
doctorate.
of
It's
work.
it's so many
Like you need
years.
true passion,
Exactly.
and a
And
lot of people have that passion,
it's
but
okay to be burned out,
also, yeah,
but is a difference. There's a difference between actually, this desire, this want, and this like drive that you have. Meanwhile, this is just something you're doing just for the money, or like
yeah.
because your parents.
I feel like being a doctor is like the worst thing you can do just for the money.
Exactly.
I'm like, I got
And
lucky that my parents aren't kind of push me into doing a science or like a lawyer, especially because I want to do an English major. It was just English major, you know.
mhm,
But I guess I do
exactly,
have
because
the caveat that I know that I want to be like I want to stay in academia and I want to be a professor, which I guess is like safer option than like going into writing, which is very unpredictable.
yeah.
Mhm.
And it's not that easy, because I remember at one point I was like, man, like I used to love writing. And I was like, realistically speaking, I don't come or know a lot of people that are in writing. I don't know if I'd be able to do this, or I don't
What
know.
kind
It
of
just
writing were you interested in?
honestly, I wanted to go into journalism because I really loved, or go into like lifestyle type of
Mhm.
like journalism and like writing. Uh but then again, I just like that I just kind of that was just like my mind at that time, because I was just like, I love that. Or even creative writing. I love just, making up stories. And I was just like, well, like I eventually, what do I want to do? And
What did your mom think about like being a writer?
a writer, she
Yeah,
liked the idea. I feel like my mom was very open, or my mom has always been very supportive of what I
that's
wanted to do.
nice.
She's always
That's
been
good.
supportive. Yeah, for sure. Especially, going to performing arts school, supporting
Mhm.
me, paying for vocal lessons. She's literally my rock. I feel like there were so many things that I kind of hopped on. Even till this day, she's proud of me of, like, doing things here and there, especially when I started being working again with Latin Women in Action. She's just like, oh, that's so great. But
Yeah.
I can still see in the back of, like, maybe like my grandmother's head. She's like, oh, you're sometimes switching around too much. Like, I don't know what it is that you want to do and stuff. Or like, do you want to be a lawyer? And I'm just like, no, like I haven't fully like stepped so, because I feel like my likings and what I want to do is kind of like, I can't just be in one thing. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's just you, or like me. I love parenting lifestyle. I like, I was like, man, the other day I was like, man, like I would like to write a children's book. I would really love to do a
That would
child,
be cute. That would actually be a really cute combination
right? Like
of what
I
you want
I
to do.
love
I guess you're doing a little bit of political journalism now with the podcast.
yeah, like
Give you an
it'll be
outlet.
so, yeah. Or like, a children's book, that's fun. It's cute. Um, Especially having a toddler, your imagination and parenting is just like everywhere.
Mhm.
Um, and then I also loved beauty, and I love also public health, being aware, being a woman, um, being aware of my body, and
Yeah,
especially in the
definitely.
Hispanic community, and or an immigrant community where women don't often get checked, don't get a pep smear, don't like do all these testings to catch up with their health. And these are very important things because it's just like, how can I protect myself? How can I prevent cancers? How can I, keep my body moving in a healthy way? So that's why I kind of like circle around and, you know, I'm a little bit everywhere.
Yeah.
So
I guess I
there's so
get
many
like
things that I like
I
that
get what your grandmother means, like by like wanting that stability. Because also, like, I wonder if it's because like our parents, like, they didn't have that same type of stability or the
exactly.
same type of choice. Like my parents always tell me, like, my mom, she tells me like she's like, oh, I want you to be better, to have options because she didn't really have many options. And there is that fear that like, oh, if you don't choose something stable, what will happen? Because
Mhm.
their experiences, being able to choose, like that's such a gift, honestly.
Exactly. Because with the things that back then, it was so much not easier, but it was just the mentality back then is okay, you become this profession and you stick with it for the rest of your life. You have a house and you're able to pay for it, the rent, etc. For people who don't, who have, let's say, not that much of education or whatever, they stick to um, maybe having their own store or working for a store or working for factories. I'm saying like, in my history of like, seeing my grandparents work, because
Mhm.
they came here at like in their 30s, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. Um, and both my grandparents worked in factories. My grandfather worked in a shoe factory. My grandmother worked in fabricating, like, clothes factory, I
Yeah,
think. I don't
I guess
recall.
I get what you mean.
So back then it was just like, okay, like set in stone, I'm gonna work this is what I'm gonna do, and so on and so forth. Um, Meanwhile, with our generation and how our society is moving, we're more open to do so many things. You can
Yeah.
do
But also
content
wanting to enjoy,
creating.
like also wanting to enjoy what we're doing, like
Exactly.
having like
Content
that
creating,
balance.
because you can do content creating and
That's a
still be
job.
a
Yeah.
writer. Yeah, content creating, being a writer, content creating, being a mother beauty, like guru,
Hmm.
whatever, it's not easy because it's like a lot of things and trying to manage time.
Yeah, it's also kind of like a little bit
There's
of luck.
still, yeah, but there's still that like hope that you can somewhat get into these things, or like
Yeah.
there's so many like outlets or so many things that you can kind of step your foot forward into.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because it's
I guess
just
it's also
like
because of like hustling and like people having like a bunch of side gigs
exactly.
and side jobs. Because also like one job nowadays, like, is it really
It's not
paying?
enough,
Like, have you
especially
seen
if
like
you live in New York City.
teachers? I'm always so shocked that teachers don't get paid that much,
They
especially
get like
like New York
40,000.
City. Yeah, like, and you're a New York City teacher.
Alrighty. So this was a great conversation
It
to have.
was such a like
And
so much
even
to
though there
talk
was,
about.
yeah, there's so much in masculinity, machismo, um, within our communities
Mhm.
because there's so many issues. And I feel like little by little though, our communities are being a lot more aware or maybe a little bit more accepting. Um,
Yeah, definitely
and
more
I hope
accepting.
and I hope for like our generation or the generations to come that, we kind of make full awareness or like having these types of conversations or like
Mhm.
videos being posted, because I'm sure your parents are on Facebook or like
They
they see
are.
social and they see these like types of videos of like, what can you do better or how do we
Mhm.
have these types of conversations about mental health within our kids.
Which is
um
such so great, the programs that there exist
yeah,
now, like that have not existed before. Like they're doing so
back
much
then.
work.
Exactly. And I feel like it's also because, one, technology, and two, so many studies are
Yeah.
being like done
And they're also
that
informing
prove,
us like to break
yeah,
generational curses. Because how are you gonna break them without knowing they exist?
exactly. So, I hope that this conversation helps other maybe parents or
Mhm.
teens, preteens, or anybody to kind of make that effort of, you know, creating a safe space or maybe one day going up to your parents or your family member or caregiver, like, this is how I'm feeling, or, ways
Trying to
to
reach that even ground too.
support. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah. Thank you for watching. I
thank
hope
you.
you enjoyed listening,
Yeah.
and we'll see you next week. Oh, and please feel free to check out the links in the description to see what Latin Women in Action has to offer, and contact us if you have anything that you want to talk about. Through the links below. Yeah.
Take care,
Bye
everyone. Thank you. See you next
bye.
time.